And it says, and it was in that time, and Judah went down from with his brothers, and he turned aside to an Adulamite man, and his name was Hirah. And Judah saw there the daughter of a Canaanite man, and his name was Shua. And he took her in marriage and came to her. And she conceived and gave birth to a son, called his name And she conceived again and gave birth to a son and called his name Onan. And she additionally gave birth again to a son, and she called his name Shelah. And he was in Chezib when she gave birth to him. And Judah took a wife from his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And the firstborn of Judah, was evil in the eyes of God, and God put him to death. And Judah said to Onan, come to your brother's wife, and let Levirate marry her, and establish seed for your brother. And Onan knew that the seed would not be his, and it was if he came to his brother's wife that he would waste to the ground, so as not to give seed to his brother. And it was evil in the eyes of God, that which he did, and also him he put to death. And Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, sit as a widow in your father's house, until my son Shelah will grow up. And he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went, and she sat in the house of her father. And the days multiplied, and Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And Judah was consoled, and he went up upon the shearers of the sheep, he and Hirah, the Adulamite friend, to Timnah. And it was told to Tamar to say, here is your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she removed her widow's garment from upon herself, and she covered with a veil and wrapped herself, and she sat at the crossroads, which is on the way to Timnah. And she saw that Shelah had grown, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And Judah saw her, and he reckoned her a harlot, and she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her to the road, and he said, come now, please, let me come to you. And he did not know that she is his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you will come to me? And he said, I myself will send off a kid of goats from the flock. And she said, if you give a guarantee until you send. And he said, what is the guarantee which I shall give you? She said, your signet and your cord and your staff, which is in your hand. And he gave her, and he came to her, and she conceived into him. She got up, and she went, and she removed her veil from upon herself, and she clothed herself in her widow's garment. And Judah sent the kid of goats by the hand of his Adulamite friend to take the guarantee from the hand of the woman. And he did not find her. And he asked the people of her place to say, where is the prostitute, she of the crossroads of the way? And they said, there was no prostitute here. And he returned to Judah. And he said, I did not find her. And also the people of the place said, there was no prostitute here. And Judah said, let her take it to herself, lest we be put to scorn. Here, I sent this kid, and you did not find her. And it was like 3 months later, and it was told to Judah to say, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has gone astray. And here she also conceived by harlotry. And Judah said, take her out, and she shall be burned. She was being taken out, and she went to her father-in-law to say, and to the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please recognize to whom belong these signet and cords and staff. And Judah recognized, and he said, she is right. It is from me, because I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not continue any more known to her. And we'll stop there. Amen. This is one of the most diverse and mind-blowing parashas that you're going to find truly in the Torah. And why is that? Well, before I actually get into that, let me just give you a quick synopsis on it. We know that Jacob settles now in Hebron, right? The time frame between the time that he settles in Hebron and Joseph's dream to the two, chamberlains when he's in the prison is 20-year gap right there alone. And I always bring this up now just so that you can get a reference of what really the time, what really it looks like. Like things don't happen fast in the Bible. There's time frames in this. So we're looking at 20 years from that time of Hebron to here. What are the mitzvot and observance that we learn in this parasha? Well, for one, prohibition against talebearing. That's number one. Why? What Joseph did. We'll talk a little bit about that very briefly. Wasting seed, of course. Adultery, of course. The laws of mourning. And the levirate marriage, which gives the brother the opportunity to raise seed for his brother if he passes, to his wife. Much of this we don't practice today, of course, concerning that aspect, but everything else we do. So what happens in here is that Jacob settles in Hebron, of course. Joseph is the most beloved of all his sons. One of the things that this portion is teaching us, we need to be very, very, very careful that we're not showing preference, especially amongst our children. If there's ever a portion that teaches against that, we're going to find that in here. And what happens is, what is really taking place in here is that Joseph, it's an extremely, extremely tzaddik, meaning he's a very righteous man. So righteous, a matter of fact, that Chazal says that he went above and beyond the letter of the law. Let's put it that way. You ever met people that way? They go above and beyond and everything. Joseph was just one of those. When it came to righteousness, he went above and beyond. If you were commanded to fast one day out of the week, Joseph will fast 3. Let's put it that way. That's just the type of person he was. In any event, what happens is that the father, who is who? Yaakov, right? Sees this in the son. The other two, unfortunately, did things that were not quite kosher, right? I don't have to get into the details right now. And they forfeit their firstborn blessing in essence. So now Joseph is the one who's so zealous and so righteous that he gets the tunic, the multi-face color tunic. Now, what was the representation of that? The representation of that was, believe it or not, spiritual above all. Meaning that he will be the priest for the family, in essence. He'll be the one that you will go to when you had questions concerning halakha, or you had spiritual questions. He will be the to-go guy. He's the figure in the family. He's going to handle all the spiritual affairs of the family. Not to mention, not just spiritual in this case, but dealing with the heritage, which is supposed to be passed on from one generation to the other, right? So, what happens? Brothers don't like him. So what's going to happen now? We have what we call animosity, hatred, envy, right? And there's plans to kill him. Some people don't like that idea, although technically they all like that idea. They just don't like the outcome of what could possibly happen, especially concerning the dad and all this. So, and the outcome, there's that essence of, they have a conscience, right? If we kill him, the blood will be up on our hands. That's literally what the Torah says. They were concerned about that. So now there's a plot. Let's just go ahead and sell him. The lots came down to, this is what we'll do. We'll throw him in the pit, let him die. And then what happens is the conscience of one of the brothers raises up and says, wait a minute, we can't do this. It's the same as killing him. So let's just go ahead and sell him. Well, Joseph gets sold, right? And now he's carried out by a caravan of the Ishmaelites. And once the Ishmaelites take him out, then he is passed on and he is sold to the house of Egypt, the house of Potiphar to be exact. And that's the end. He goes to prison. while he's there. Actually, he raises up. He becomes somewhat a trustee for Potiphar's house. So he's not doing that labor work anymore, but now he's doing more, clerical work, if I may say, taking care of the household and the affairs of the household and whatnot. An event rises where now Potiphar's wife wants to get on with him, so to speak, right? He rejects, and now he's falsely accused. And now he goes to prison. And that's the end of the parasha. Now, what's so striking about this parasha is that for the next 3 parasha, the story is about Joseph. But the 2 figures that really stand out in the 3 parasha is not just Joseph, believe it or not. It's actually Joseph and Judah. They're the main theme names for this next three portions that we're going to be covering. Now, why I chose to cover chapter 38 today is if you notice something irregular takes place in here. The story starts with brothers who are essentially very, very jealous of their one brother, right? They commit an atrocity and sell him. He goes into Egypt. And then all of a sudden, in the middle, 30 verses literally to the count, 30 verses right in the middle of this portion takes us to the story of Judah and Tamar, which has no relationship whatsoever in the flow of the actual portion, which is Joseph going to Egypt. Why? Why does the Torah get interrupted with the Judah and Tamar affair? It's almost as if somebody glued it there. Didn't belong there. Like a page got ripped and it got replaced with this one. Like it doesn't flow. There's no connection. But actually there is a connection. We're going to see something very, very beautiful. We just covered Parashat Vayishlach last week, right? One of the things that we covered about Parashat Vayishlach was the whole aspect of what? The 2 pictures, the 2 names of the portion had to do with what? With Esau and with Yaakov, right? We talked about the understanding how Jacob bowed down before Esau 7 times. How that was so prominent and so important because the sages of Israel discuss the meaning of that and how important it is for today in the ruling system that we live in. It's called Esau, in essence. And how we took this back, rather our sages took this back to the Garden of Eden, right? And how deceitfulness and trickery was used in order to what? To bring a deception for the fall, right? In essence, as we call it. And that the essence of that is now trickery and deceitfulness also needs to be used in order to what? To bring the ultimate tikkun into the world, the ultimate reparation. Which is why Rebekah disguised Jacob as Esau. You guys remember? He was about to get the blessing. Esau was going to get the blessing. So now Jacob has to go disguise as his brother through this is all through Rebekah, so that he can obtain the blessing. Right? And he does. We're going to see something very similar in this portion. I mean, it goes rampant. Prepare yourself for this one. It's just going to be mind-blowing because there's a lot of elements that I want to introduce today. That's why it's kind of difficult putting this portion together because there's so much foundation that you need to have. So I'm trying to do this without really going into a really, really deep drash in essence. But I want to pick up real quickly in this portion. And let me start with that and then we'll go with that. So we know that Joseph is now taken out. He's going into Egypt, right? And now Judah says in here in chapter 38, it says, and it was in that time, it says, that Judah went down from with his brothers. Okay? It says, Vayehi ba'et hahi, Vayered Yehuda me'et Echai, it says. And what a beautiful choice of words that it uses when it talks about Judah leaving now. It says that he did what? Vayered Yehuda, number one. The word there is yered. What does it mean? Yered literally means to diminish, to decrease. Hear me out, folks, because simultaneously there's two events taking place. Keep this in mind, please. We have the Joseph account that he's going down to Egypt, but now we have the Tamar and Judah account that's taking place at the same time, simultaneously. Both of them actually are connected in such a way. Why does the Torah says that Yehuda Yerideh? He literally diminished, it says. And when that talks about diminishing, it means lowering himself. In other words, Yehuda became diminished because Yered means when you leave Israel. By the way, when somebody leaves the land of Israel, it is considered as if they Yered. You're coming down in holiness. You're coming down in levels. Let's put it that way. When you go up, you aliyah. You are rising in spiritual level. In this case, Yehuda is actually decreasing in a spiritual level. But here's the kicker. Two things that happen simultaneously. So is Joseph. See, Joseph is also decreasing because Joseph is going where? To Egypt. You see? Not only that, he's been sold at this point. So we got two characters in here who are what? Coming from a lofty level to a low level. And what is the purpose of this? It is, as I would say, just say this is now a tool, in essence, a tool, hear me out, that God is going to use to bring about the final redemption. By the way, we see something very, very interesting in this portion as well. This is the first inauguration in the Torah of Israel actually being in the exile as a nation. Because before it was just the forefathers. Abraham, Isaac, well, not Isaac, but Abraham, Yaakov, you know what I mean? But now that they're actually formalized as a nation, this is the first time that together as a nation, they're all going into exile. This is the first exile. Very significant and very, very important. So it says in here that Judah went down. In other words, he's coming down. He's debasing himself in essence. And what happens when he debases himself, when he leaves, he does the number one mother law of things that you're not supposed to do, which is marry a Canaanite. Exactly what Judah did. He married a Canaanite. Specifically, the Torah hasn't been given at this point at a corporate level on Mount Sinai, but here stands true. Abraham was told. Isaac, that one of the things what Abraham was like, make sure that you don't get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Whatever you do, don't pick him from them. Here we have Judah literally going and getting married to a Canaanite. This is something very interesting what's happening in here. And I need you to keep track of what's happening because at the same time, like I said, Joseph is being escorted out to go to where? To Egypt. And what happens, I want to continue because it really is, it's amazing. It says that he took this woman in marriage, okay? She conceived, she gave birth to, of course, a son named and then Onan. What happened with both? They die. Now, the Bible tells us why Onan died, but it doesn't tell us why died. It just says that he was not pleasing. He died. So what exactly is it that did? Like I said, we know Onan. Unfortunately, he didn't live up to what he was supposed to do, which is continue to provide seed for his brother. Like, he was taking the benefits of the whole deal, but not wanting to take the responsibility in essence. And according to Chazal, did the same thing. According to Chazal, had different motives though. According to Chazal, literally spilled seed on the ground as well, but only because he didn't want his wife to lose her figure. That's what they say. You know what I mean? So it was the different motives, again, food for thought. Whatever case may be, it was not good and pleasing in the eyes of God. Now, believe it or not, stuff like that still happens today. It's not like, what? Never heard of such a reason. It still happens today. So now we have in here these two who died, right? And now things get really, really complicated. And we're going to pick up on 9. And Onan knew that his seed would not be his, and it was when he came to his brother's wife, he will waste it to the ground, so not to give seed to his brother. And it was evil in the eyes of God what he did, and he put him to death. And Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, sit as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah will grow up. Okay? I need you to understand that what he is asking in here is not the most easiest thing. He's asking this lady to literally sit as a widow until this son becomes of age. And that aspect of a widow, our beloved sages teach that is actually also an allegory to Israel being forsaken in the exile, in essence. That's why the prophets talk so much about your garments of widowhood to the nation who is actually in exile at this very moment, because she's been kicked out of the house, in essence, or the husband died, either or. So in here, by the way, this is also the garments of widowhood is also another analogy for mourning, in essence. Tamar, it's so willing to do this, you have to applaud her for this, that she actually accepts this offer, and she waits. So it says in here, Judah actually tells her why. I'm afraid that if you marry my last son, he's going to die. It's like, all the husbands die. If this would actually been today, there will be an investigation to see what's happening. You know what I mean? Like there's some kind of foul play going on in here with this lady, What is it, Black Widow? You know what I mean? She'd be labeled, she's the Black Widow of the Tanakh, in essence. Or her husbands, for some reason, just pass away. So he's, of course, naturally, like anybody, he's a little reluctant to just give his other son to her. He kind of wants to give it a pause, kick back, and see kind of what happens before he actually does this. So it said that she sat in her father's house. And the days multiply, and Shua's daughter, his wife, died. So now Judah's wife dies. And I'm repeating all this because I need you to see the theme of what's happening in here. Many of us have an idea in how God delivers. I want to show you that just about every example in the Tanakh, with the exception of the deliverance of Egypt, and even part of that still, was a lot of work and effort and pain on the people. Let's put it that way. This is an important aspect because we need to see, I want to call this teaching God's MO, which means method of operation. How does God deliver? How does God answer prayers? We have to be in the same accord, meaning the Creator in you has to have that understanding, because otherwise what's going to end up happening is you're going to have expectations of one thing, and when it doesn't come to fruition, what happens 9 out of 10? People lose faith. Why? Because I expected God to do it this way. Because this is what I am doing, because I feel this is my duty, right? And when that doesn't happen, it's like now we look to the heavens and we said, Mazeh Hashem, what happened? What did I do wrong? Where am I going wrong with you? So, here we're going to see something very interesting. His wife dies, coincidentally, too. There's a lot of death happening in here, in this portion. So he went up to the shears of his sheep. He took Hira, which is his friend, and now the news travels. Everybody's FaceTiming each other, letting each other know, going to Facebook, posting it, saying, hey, by the way, Judah is going to shear the sheep, and this is what's happening. The boy is already fully grown, okay? So it says here, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear the sheep. And it says in here, and she removed her widow's garment from upon herself, it says, and she covered it with a veil and wrapped it. I got to share this with you. This is beautiful. It says in here, Vataser bigdai, it says. Al menuta, me alai. It says in here that she literally removed, okay, which is the word tasar. Vatasar, the taf, samek, and resh, means to literally, she removed the garment. Or remove, not garment. Garment is baguette. So that word in there is interesting because what's really happening here is very, very subtle. If you take the word tasar and you flip the letters around, what word do you get? Seter in Hebrew. Same word, same letters. All you have to do is just flip them around. And when you flip these seter around, what does that mean? It means literally hiding in secret. As a matter of fact, it's the same name for Esther. Guys know the name Esther is from seter. She was hidden. Meaning, for the eyes of the beholder, she wasn't the Jewish girl. Here, we see something very similar. What is she doing in here? She is literally turning. By the way, tasad and seter literally means to turn aside, to deviate, to move away from the formal. Here is something that has to happen. Because you see, Tamar has been waiting all this time. She was a righteous woman. I'll prove that in a minute here. She was righteous. We can probably conclude with certainty that this woman prayed every single day, especially when she was waiting in her father's house to go ahead and get married. And her two other husbands passed away. I could get the fact that she is actually waiting and she's doing the right thing proves more than enough that this was a righteous woman and that she would have been praying every single day. She would have been praying to God every day to help her during this terrific, horrific time that she was dealing with. Right? Here's the question I want to ask you. What was the answer? Gloom. Nothing. If I drop a pen right now, you'll hear it in this room. That was the answer. Silence. So what does she do? See, a lot of times we don't realize that in the silence is the answer. She had to now resort to something very, very unusual that we're going to see very consistent in the Bible. Literally what Rebecca did with Jacob is exactly what she's doing in a very, very subtle way here. See, she's removing one garment and putting another to come what? Disguise and deceitfulness. That's the exact same approach that was used with Jacob. And I'm going to give you about 20 more examples here today to really, so you can see it, that I'm not making up stories. You know, we see it with Esther. So what's happening in here now is that she is removing the widow's garment, right? It says that she covered herself, right? And she wrapped herself in these new, and she sat at the crossroads. What does that mean, the crossroads? Anybody? According to in the Talmud, the crossroads, these are things that are important to know. When we read in the Bible, we have to understand these things. What are you talking about, the crossroads? First of all, we have to understand what is the actual word used for in Hebrew for the word crossroad. Just taking the English in itself, it's a subjective matter. What do you mean crossroads? Are you talking about like the fork, the Y, going to Vernon? Is that a crossroad? What are we talking here? That's number one. And number two, what is actually the Hebrew word used for that in order to determine what it actually is saying? It actually literally says in Hebrew, Vayeshev befetach einayim. Said it very slowly for you. Literally, at the opening of the eyes. That's the word. Petach is opening. Ayin is eye. So where do we get crossroads from the opening of the eye? Like, how does that even correlate together? You see the importance, focus of this. Importance of understanding Hebrew. Understanding all of this is so vital. Understanding what really the understanding of this was. Because otherwise we'll come up with our interpretation. This is bad news. Got to understand really what it's saying. I want to share some of the things in here. Crossroads, onkelos, says literally opening of the eyes. A crossroad being a visible place or a place where people open their eyes to look which way they're going to go. Right? Literally a gateway also. A passage framed by two well springs as well. Ibn Ezra literally says this entire narrative requires an opening of the eyes into what was transpiring beneath the surface at that very moment. Meaning, this is something very cool. This is something very spiritual that's taking place here. In other words, Hashem is doing something right now with this woman sitting at the crossroad. It takes an opening the eye to see what the work of what kind of work is being done at that very moment. And furthermore, it says in here that she sat there. So I want to share one more thing in here. In the Talmud, it says she stationed herself in the doorway of Abraham our father, a place which all eyes were turned as well. This is very interesting. Maor Shemesh says this: Abraham put himself at great risk, both physically and spiritually, to rescue the renegade Lot and his sodomite cohorts. You guys remember when he went to rescue his nephew? Because he knew that the soul of the Messiah was destined to emerge from those very circumstances. So too did Tamar risk both life and virtue to the same end in the doorway of Abraham's tent, essentially. In this case, she's using deceitfulness in order to accomplish something very important. With me so far? So, it says in here that she has saw that Shelah had grown and that she had not been given to him as a wife. Why did this bother her so much? Why didn't she just move on? Oh, he's dead. Like, you don't want to give me your son? Fine, I'm moving on. How many of you would have done that? Sure. More fish in the sea. We'll go. I'm sure God will provide a husband for me, right? But why is it that she is so gun-ho about Shelah? See, there's a drash about this that's very beautiful. I want to share this real quickly here. And Rashi literally says this. When it says that she saw that Shelah had grown, Tamar was determined to bear Judah's progeny. Realizing that Judah was not going to marry her to Shelah, she decided to seduce Judah to himself. Why? Because there's something that she saw that she knew. According to our sages, says that she already knew that the deliverer will come from that lineage. That's why she didn't just get up and leave. That's why she was also a tzadikah, a righteous woman. This was very, very important for her to continue this lineage, to bring the final redemption into play. So what happens is she plays the role of the harlot, right? And now something very interesting takes place. It says in verse 16, and he turned aside to her to the road, and he said, "Come now, please let me come to you," as he did not know that this was, of course, his daughter-in-law. And now what happens is that this business transaction that takes place. This is very, very interesting. It says, and he said, "I myself was sent off a kid of goats from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a guarantee until you send," and he said, "What is the guarantee which I shall give you?" Okay. Now in Hebrew, when it says, "What is the guarantee that I shall give you?" it literally says, "Ma ha'eravon asher eten lach," meaning I should give you. But the word there for guarantee, because it says, what is the guarantee? It is the same word that we use for Eref. What is Eref? When we say Eref Tov, evening, right? So why is Eref the same root word for evening? In here, share with the same root for guarantee. Whereas it turns out, Orev in Hebrew, in law, means not so much a guarantee, but a guarantor. You see what I mean? So, she's asking, the guarantor is going to be the kingship of Judah, in essence. Which, in essence, we know it's talking about Mashiach in here. Who's the guarantor? Mashiach. See? So she's asking. And she said, your signet and your cord and your staff, which is in your hand. Why is she asking for these three things specifically? This gets really, really interesting, I promise you. Why specifically these three things? I'm going to share one of the interpretation and in here. Most of them are about the same. And Al-Shish shares this. It says, Tamar is asking Judah to guarantee that the progeny that is to issue from their union, the kids of goats, will possess an inalienable bond with God, represented by the signet of the circumcision. 2, commitment to the mitzvot, represented by the threats of the tzitzit. That's why it talks about the threat. And 3, the qualities of leadership that the staff of Judah represents, in essence. 3 aspects that literally represents the kingship and the authority that will be given in essence. So, we can see in here that the mind of Tamar at this point is about the redemption. Now, bear in mind, folks, please hear this. Everything that's happening in here, if it would have not happened, there will be no salvation. There will be no Mashiach. You following? The events that transpire in here are so vital for human history. We're talking here. Not just what's happening with Joseph and of course, Judah and Tamar, but literally this is going to affect all mankind in essence. What this lady is doing in here, in the work, in the position that she's putting herself, and going in deceitfulness and using treachery, is actually going to save the entire universe. This is mind-blowing. Now, the same thing with Yaakov. If that event would have not taken place, the blessing that Isaac pronounced, same thing. There would be no Mashiach. There will be no salvation. There will be no king of Israel that is righteous in essence. And I'll cover that in just a minute in here. Why? The signet cord and the staff represent the 3 components of the miracle of Hanukkah lights too, they say. That's why they say that in this season, this portion is always read during the season of Hanukkah. Always happens to fall in Hanukkah. So it's stating in here that it represents the 3 components of the miracle on Hanukkah lights. The cruse of oil, whose purity was attested to the signet of the high priest, the wicks, which are the cords, and the menorah, which is the staff, in essence. How beautiful that is. And all connects to righteousness in essence. So what happens now? He comes back, she's gone. He has no clue what's happening. But the Bible actually, the Tanakh actually goes to the point to actually give us a time frame in here. It says, in verse 24, it was like 3 months later. Like very, very specific, you know what I mean? It didn't say in a time to come to pass. It throws in the number there. Like it says, and 3 months later, and it was told to Judah to say, your daughter-in-law has gone astray. Here she also has conceived by harlotry, right? So I want to share some of the things in here that is proposed. In the Shulchan Aruch, Jerusalem Talmud says this: a widow or a divorcee should not remarry until 3 months after she was widowed or divorced, in order to avoid a situation in which it is not known which husband is the father of the child. It's interesting. You know, that's one terminology in there, why it's used. So I thought that was, very, very interesting. But what really strikes out, not so much the 3 months, but literally says Tamar has gone astray, and here she's also conceived by harlotry. And Judah, now Judah's response is what's mind-blowing. What does Judah say? Take her out, and she shall be burned. Where in the Torah does it say that you get burned if you get caught by committing harlotry? You get stoned. You get stoned. That's the Torah. That's what the Torah says. But not burn. Why did Judah say burn? Why burn this individual, this human being? Well, as it turns out, folks, this is what I'm talking about. Leviticus 21:9. If you go to Leviticus 21:9, it states that the daughter of a high priest, if she gets caught committing harlotry, she shall be burned. That one is an exception. So, according to Hassad says, the daughter of a high priest who commits harlotry is desecrated her father, she shall be burned by fire. So the Talmud identifies Shem as Melchizedek, king of Salem, who was a priest of the God Most High. So she was a descendant of that, in essence. So because of that, that's why he said, let her be burned. But also shares the level of what? Of her righteousness in this case. She was a righteous woman in this case. Rabbi, this is Midrash Rabbi Rashi says, Ephraim Mashkat, in the name of Rabbi Meir, Tamar was the daughter of Shem, which is the son of Noah, and was therefore being judged as a daughter of a priest who commits adultery, in essence. So that's why the language in here that is used is very harsh as to, she is to be sent out with fire or burned by fire. So she's been taken out, and she sent to her father-in-law to say, into the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. Now the plot gets very juicy. And she said, please recognize to whom belong these signet and cords and staff. And Judah says, the Tanakh, that he recognized it. One thing that it's subtle, that it's not mentioned in here, but it's actually saying it, but it's not really literally, overtly saying it, is that Tamar was so righteous that instead of publicly embarrassing Judah, she proposed the question. She didn't say, well, it's yours, Judah. Again, she was being very, very, very reserved and making sure that even though this guy at this point wasn't acting in his best behavior, she still was very, very keen to make sure that he was not embarrassed. So that's why she proposed the question to whoever this belongs. This is the real deal in here. This is the father. And when Judah saw it, you see what I mean? He already knew. In other words, keep the sin private. You know what I mean? Don't be going publicly announcing the bells and look how wrong he did. So I thought that was very beautiful. But it says in here that once he recognized it, he said, she is right. It is from me. And it is it is from me that's really, really amazing. And I got to share this with you guys because it's mind-blowing. I mean, extremely mind-blowing. We're going to look at the Hazal presents this in here because it says it is from me. This whole aspect, what is from me. According to Hazal, this came from a heavenly voice. Not necessarily that he said it, but there was a heavenly voice saying this is from me. Meaning that the whole circumstance and how everything went down, everything came from heaven. In other words, this was all decree from heaven. So Hazal says in allegorical level, the verses can be interpreted as a reference to the story Hanukkah, which we are in today. And this connection that it makes beautiful, which is celebrated, of course, during this cycle. When it says it was like 3 months later. Remember, in the Torah says it was 3 months later. Why 3 months? Because 3 months later it would have said it is the 25th of Kislev, the third month of the year, some 3 months after the days of judgment, which is what? Rosh Hashanah. 3 months later in Yom Kippur. It was told to Judah. Chazal, and again, this is all allegory, but it really brings this home and in such a reality. It was told to Judah. When it says it was told to Judah, the accusatory forces in heaven make the following indictment to God, in other words. And we know this is true. This part is true because we see that in Job. There's accusations. There's angels who do accusations. They're going to charge you. They're going to say, you done this, you done that. So these angels are saying this to God, which is an analogy to what it was told to Judah. They're making that comparison. Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has gone astray. What is the allegory on that? Your bride, the people of Israel, have betrayed in their marriage covenant with you. Just like the accusation of Tamar, who said that she was committing harlotry. Same thing. She has also conceived by harlotry. Says she has been seduced by the enticement of material world and has incorporated its evil and profanity into herself. Take her out and she shall be burned. The allegory behind that is God decrees persecution and suffering of his people to punish them for their sins. But what happens next? Tamar says, here's the signet. Here's the staff. The response to that is what is mamash mind-blowing. The response to that is, but the bride Israel insists, into the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. Why? Because there's an accusation against her. It says in here, my only desire, this is the bride speaking in terms, Tamar. My only desire is to you, my husband. All my sins and infidelities derive from my longing for you. What does he mean by that? For you have banished me from our home, the exile. Decree that I await my redemption in lonely widowhood, which is what was happening with Shelah. She was in a widowhood sitting by herself in mourning, waiting for Shelah. Okay, think that in mind now, Shelah, because we're going to see something very prophetic here. So in here, the allegory to that is that she's saying, I've been awaiting lonely in this widowhood. It is my unending quest for you that leads me to seek you out in all these alien pathways and crossroads. And I want you to think of that because I want to continue in here. When you look at today, the world, folks, and you look at all forms of religion, these are all the alien, foreign crossroads. Many people who are in these paths, they really generally are seeking God. It's not like God speaks so clearly today that we all can hear him. It's not like we all sit down and have coffee with God every morning and have this elaborate conversation where if I'm in the kitchen, I can also hear God speaking. And if you actually have that, well, mazel tov to you. But for the rest of the world, that's not a reality. You know what I mean? Because if it was a reality, the whole world would be turning to God right now. But the reality is, the crossroads, she's saying, you have hidden yourself so much. You have removed yourself from me so much that I can't find you and I can't hear you. I'm searching for you, and that's why I'm caught up in the crossroads. I'm caught up in all these systems of religion, but it's not because I don't desire you. I do desire, which is why I'm looking for you. Now, to continue with that, please recognize to whom these signet of cords and staff. What is the allegory for that, for the bride? Here is, this is what the bride says to God, here is irrefutable proof of my claim. See the burning wicks and oil in the menorah, number one, attesting to the time when I sacrifice my very life and suffer every cruel torture for your sake. You yourself performed the miracle of the oil in recognition of my sacrifice, giving me these tokens of my faithfulness to you. This is the bride saying this to God, just as Tamar is saying it to Judah. And God declares Just like Judah declares, she is right. It is from me. Meaning, because I did not give her to my son, Shelah. Shelah is the third son. Remember that. I promise, this is God saying, I promise to send the Messiah to redeem my people, but I have tarried in the fulfillment of my promise and allowed them to languish in their exile. How long have we been waiting for the Messiah? Not that long, right? Only a couple years or so, right? That is the cause of the convoluted path they sometimes take in this search for me. It's beautiful. So the Chazal is making the allegory in here, what is taking place with her. How in that time of judgment, in the same path, because again, remember, she looks disguised. She looks like a harlot. She was in the cross paths of the roads. But really, her intent inside was what? To seek her husband. And this is what's so beautiful about this. And what happens is something very beautiful. Listen to this. And it was, verse 27, and it was at that time of her giving birth, here twins were in her belly. Does that sound familiar? Jacob, Esau, Rebecca, right? Guys remember? Twins. See, this is cyclical. I need you to see this, folks. This is all cyclical. Now we got twins. And look what it says in here. Here are twins in her belly, and it was when she gave birth, and he put out his hand, and the midwife took, and she tied a crimson thread on his hand to say, this one came out first. And it was as he was returning his hand, and here his brother came out, and she said, what have you burst upon yourself? A bursting. And he called his name Perez. And afterwards came out his brother. I mean, the language is almost identical to Parashat Toldot, by the way. And afterwards his brother came out, in whose hand was the crimson thread, and she called his name Zerah. Now, what's so prophetic about this? Perez means to break forth, to breach. What is Zerah? Zerah is the light. What happens? Listen to this. Let's put this together so you can see. Through this all deceitfulness that she did, through all the disguise and what the position that she put herself to endanger herself, came forth what? She broke forth and brought forth the light, the two sons, which one will be the seed of Mashiach, the Messiah. You see? This is absolutely beautiful. I want to share this, and then we'll conclude. Judah and Tamar, real quickly. Chazal says in here, we have already discussed that Joseph and Judah duality in the leadership of Israel, and how Joseph, in the focus of learning, growth, and self-perfection, which he represents, is the channel that leads into the messianic sovereignty of Judah. What's happening? There's two things happening. That's why they're connected here. Why all of a sudden in the middle we have this Tamar story? Because on the one hand, Joseph is being sent out to the exile for the purposes of gathering the brothers. And at the very same time, God is preparing the Mashiach through Tamar and Judah. See, they work together. This is what's so beautiful about it. But it says in here, so it is no accident that Joseph and Judah are the two central figures in Vayeshev. The explicit narrative of our parasha is the story of how Joseph inaugurates the first exile of Israel and how he rises by means of his personal charisma, righteousness, and integrity to the leadership that will guide his brethren in the first step of becoming a people. But, it says in here, between the lines, the kingship of Judah is germinating, it says, in preparation for the end days, when the ultimate purpose of making the material world a home for God will be realized. In the words of the Midrash Rabbah, what the Midrash Rabbah 38:1 says this. It was at that time the sons of Jacob were engaged in selling Joseph. We see that here today in this parasha. Reuben was occupied with his sackcloth and fasting. Jacob was occupied with mourning because he thought Joseph had died. Judah was busy taking a Canaanite wife. And God was creating the light of the Messiah, it says, at that very moment. Even as the first exile of Israel was developing from the sale of Joseph in Egypt, God was already arranging the birth of the final Redeemer through Tamar and Judah. So the light of Messiah was brought one step nearer to fruition with the birth of Peres, the ancestor King David. But that light had to win its way through some decidedly dark and convoluted corridors. Hear this out. That redemption didn't come because a person was pious. I got news flash for you folks. We need to drop the spirit of piety already. It wasn't because of piety. Let's put it this way. Joseph would have never, ever agreed to go to Egypt and look like an Egyptian, smell like an Egyptian, live among the Egyptians, and worse, rule like an Egyptian. Ever, he would have never done it willfully. What would have been the outcome? I'm going to stay here with my father because this is the promised land. And I'm going to continue practicing my righteousness. Right? Because that's our understanding. We want to fix the world, but we want to fix it through the spirit of piety. The Torah so much is speaking against this, folks. I'm going to give you several examples here today. And it's one of the things that you do need to consider because it is in your Bible. Can't erase it. You can't say, well, I don't want to read that part. It's there. And at one point or another, you're going to have to make an account for that. When you really think about it, you read it, and somebody who doesn't believe in God says, well, what is this? What is this trickery that they use, buddy? What's the righteousness in that? We have to be able to give answers. Not just engage in some theological gymnastic to give them answers, but rather give them genuine answers. We're going to see something very interesting about this. Look. Tamar's aborted marriages with and Onan. Tamar disguising herself as a prostitute and seducing Judah on the crossroads. What is this? Is this the Bible that we read? Is this how God does things? Does it have to be that way? Could it not be another way? Could it not be a more formal, righteous, pious way? Did it have to be this disgusting that she has to actually pretend to be a prostitute? And this guy, crazy enough to stop and take the offer? Has anybody ever sat down and think about this? Have you ever really pondered this? The answer is no, you haven't. That's the reality. You haven't because you can't understand it. And the things that we understand, what do? We ignore. But in Judaism, we don't ignore these things. In Judaism, we address these things. We don't ignore the passages that are difficult. We want to address these passages. That's the whole point. It says in here, continuing on, she seduced Judah to the crossroad. The death sentence imposed on Tamar for harlotry and Judah's dramatic public admission, culminating to the unusual birth. All this culminating to the unusual birth of Peres and Zerah. Then, it says in here, the Kabbalists note that the Judah-Tamar union is but one of the series of morally dubious unions in the ancestry of the royal house of David and the Messiah. And what do they mean by that? Well, let's look. Here's the examples. You ready to take notes? Because this is going to be good. Here's the number one. The incident of Lot and his daughters which resulted in the births of Moab and Ammon. Can you explain that one? Daddy having sex with his daughter. Excuse my language, but becoming intimate. The union of that came the line of the Messiah. Can you explain that, please? How righteous is that is? How pious is that action? How about the other one? Tamar's seduction of Judah, which Peres and Zerah were conceived. We read that today. How about the marriage of Ruth the Moabite, a descendant of Lot, and his elder daughter to Boaz, a descendant of Perez? How do you explain that one? How do you explain Jesse, the grandson of Boaz, and Ruth, fathers King David, in circumstances which are tainted with the appearance of sin? What do they mean by that? I'm going to share with you. Give me 1 second here. Here, hold on 1 second. So I'm going to continue. I'll get back to that in a minute. David's marriage with Bathsheba, from which King Solomon was born. How about that one? Solomon's marriage to Naamah, the Ammonite. This is going back to, again, Moab and Ammon. A descendant of the child born of Lot to his younger daughter. What does the Ari says about this? The Ari says, know that when a very lofty soul, listen to this, this is very important. When a very lofty, you want answers, we're going to give you answers. When a very lofty soul needs to come into the world, why do we say that? Because in Judaism, it is believed that all souls are created in Hashemayim. Your soul is not created here. You remember, Hashem breathed life into Adam. So the soul is not formed here. The soul is formed in the heavens, in the essence. And the soul is sent like a shaliach into the earth for a specific mission. What is that mission? To do tikkun, to do reparation. So what happens in here says that when a lofty soul needs to come into the world, it can be extracted from the klipa. Anybody ever heard of the klipa? Okay. What is the klipa? The klipa is literally the forces of evil, the husk of evil in essence. It's the layer that in the mornings, for those of you who are not morning people, that's the klipa right there. You don't want to get up. You're in a bad mood. You don't want to talk to nobody. You don't feel like doing anything. Your attitude is negative. It's like a layer and a blanket that's holding you back. That's the klipa. If you don't know what that feels like, again, mazel tov to you. But that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like in essence. So it says that when you got a lofty soul, what happens is this has to be extracted from the klipa. Why? It says in here, how do we extract this from the klipa? How did these lofty souls get extracted from the klipa? Says, the Ari says, the only way is by cunning and trickery. This is the reason why throughout the whole Tanakh, we see this. You see what I mean? Why? Because if the person looks very holy and the person is very, very holy and it's pious and whatnot, the klipa is not going to let them go. But if the person appears to be a common folk of the world, then guess what? The klipa doesn't have that grip, that tight grip that it would like an asadik in essence. So this is the reason why with Jacob, he had to be disguised as Esau. You see what I mean? This is why in here, Tamar had to be disguised as a prostitute. This is why with Lot, the daughters came, and there was deceitfulness there, by the way. Not towards Lot, necessarily, but towards the daughters of Lot. Why? Because according to Hazal, and actually not even so much Hazal, I mean, the Tanakh says it, they thought that they were the only ones left in the world. Remember what happened? There was a complete destruction, right? And what was going to happen? Everything was going to get destroyed, right? Sodom and Gomorrah, all of it. And they felt that all humanity in essence was destroyed, and the only humans that were left, it's the three ones that are in the cave, which is daddy and the two daughters. So in their mind, they're like, we have to save humanity. Again, this is deceitfulness. It was through that thought that they believed, but guess what? God approved. Now, you want to hear something really mind-blowing? It's that actually God approved. Because it's one thing if human comes up with this idea. I get that clear. But when God approves it, now you really have to sit and think, wow, God actually approved this. It was good. From here comes the deliverance of the world. Can you imagine that? From such dark place. So it says in here, the Ari goes on to saying that it only can come through cunning and trickery. Thus King David says, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. That's in Psalms 51:7, by the way. This is also why all the kings of the house of David and the Messiah issue from Ruth the Moabite and the union of Judah, Tamar, essentially. And this whole aspect of King David, when it's talking about King David, which is really, really amazing. Somebody's beeper. Okay. So in here, it states that King David was brought forth in iniquity. You know what I mean? And the Chazal says that the reason why that is that King David's father, of course, when he was about to become one, he thought that it was his concubine. And as it turned out, it was actually his wife. And then to make it matters worse, after the union, it says, according to Chazal, that there was a stain of blood on the bed, which means that it was not kosher. It was not supposed to be doing this. You see what I mean? So this is why King David says that in iniquity I was conceived, in essence, the same concept. So it says in here, the teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidim offer a number of explanations for the phenomenon. First, the sin, now we're going to get to the root of it, the sin of the tree of knowledge and the shattering of the vessels. What happened there? And this goes back to, in this upcoming year, we'll do a more in-depth teaching on this, because you do need to have a little bit of background on this. So after Adam and Hava sinned and ate from the forbidden fruit, it says that basically the sparks of holiness shattered through the whole universe, in essence. Okay? And now what happens is that all these sparks that are holy and they are good, the essence of good, you can find them in evil and vice versa. In other words, I'm gonna share this because this is really mind-blowing. I think it's amazing. It says in here, the shattering of the vessel, it endangered, caused a cosmic confusion of good and evil. Meaning that prior to the fall, the aspect of evil was separate from that of good. This is the reason why Adam and Eve were not supposed to partake of that. Why? Because now it's intermixed. Now you can't tell. But prior, it was separate. Evil was in one side, good was in another, in essence, in that dimension, in essence. When the fall came in, all of that burst, in essence. And all the sparks of goodness, all of that got mixed all over through the universe with good and evil mixed. Now we have a problem. Mankind has a problem now because now we can discern. This is the bigger problem in the Garden of Eden. So it says in here that this cosmic confusion of good and evil, so that there is no evil without some good buried within it. And there is no good without some evil mixed into it. That's true. It's so true. I don't care where you go in this universe. I don't care what teacher you find in this universe. Why do you think we need Mashiach? Why do you think we need God to come out of the concealment? Because the essence of real truth will come about. Now you're going to understand why it's so important for God to come out of the concealment and for Mashiach to reign. Why? Because that's going to bring about all the sparks of holiness back. You ever take a glass and you shatter into the ground? What happens? Like just glass everywhere. And you even have the powder aspect of the glass. What's happening is that shatterment, I'm using an allegory here, mankind is in charge. We're gathering all those pieces of glasses and putting them together to put the vessel back intact. See? That makes sense? But you see the problem, there's a problem though. Because when you drop that glass and it explodes, because that's like an explosion, now there's shattered pieces in every little corner of dirt everywhere. And it is our job to now go and gather those sparks. This is the reason why cunning and treachery is used in the Bible. Because in some parts that you may need to gather that spark, if they see you coming and you look too righteous, they're not going to let you in. Or they're going to reject you, or they're not going to want you. No, you cannot reach certain levels when you're too pious. This is a huge thing, folks. It's a really, really huge thing. And that's why I love this portion, because it coincides with Vayeshev, Vayishlach. So in keeping with the principle that the higher a thing is, the lower it falls. The higher a vessel is, the soul that is lofty, it's going to come down to the lowest stream of the earth. The loftier souls were cast into the lowest depth of the klippah and must be extracted with cunning and trickery through means that have the appearance of what? Of sin. This is why with Joseph, we're going to find out in the next 3 parashot, the brothers didn't recognize him. Joseph was ruling the entire world, by the way, not just Egypt. He looked Egyptian. Everybody believed he was Egyptian. But we're going to find out that Joseph, in that position of appearance of evil, and by the way, we're not saying that you need to go commit evil. What we're saying is that the appearance of things, the spirit of piety for sure has to diminish. There's got to be a balance. Joseph, being a pious man that he was, had to lower himself to the level that he looked like an Egyptian in order for him to do that job. If Joseph would have remained a pious individual, meaning even in appearance, because he was still pious inside, he was a tzaddik. But if he would have been like, I cannot enter into that temple of Pharaoh because there's idols everywhere. You know what I mean? I'm too holy for that. I have to go mikvah. You know what I mean? Could have Joseph ruled the entire world then? No. As a matter of fact, Pharaoh would have had his head, if anything. Same thing with, again, Rebekah and Jacob. Would that blessing actually be given to actually Jacob? The answer is no. How do we know it's no? Because this is the path that God chose. We can choose that with certainty. If there was a better way, God would have chosen a better way. This is the path. Our job is to reach out to the klippah, to reach out to the ends and collect the spark of holiness. That's why we come into this world with one purpose and one purpose only. Tikkun. That's it. Tikkun. Without tikkun, we have nothing. This is why Esther had to go disguised. She looked like a lady from Susa. Nobody knew that she was a nice little Jewish girl. But yet she was in power. This is why Daniel was put in a position of power the same way. Look Babylonian as it can be. All these things, we see it through the Tanakh, folks. So, what do we take from today's message is exactly just that. Continuing and understanding now this spark of holiness that we all need to gather to reduce the spirit of piety, folks. 9 out of 10 pious people, 9 out of 10 pious people are pious in their own eyes, by the way. Meaning it's their own right level of righteousness that they believe is right. And we often shut down opportunities that God has given us to bring about a greater redemption. That makes sense. That's the ultimate thing in the Tanakh in here. This is why all these different examples are used. And there's more. You go into the book of Judges, forget it. You got the lefty guy who was a heck of a mobster when he went in to slow the king. It says that he was left-handed and he took the sword and the king wasn't expecting it. He said, I have a message from you from God, coming off friendly. We see this over and over, folks. The way to redeem today, folks, is not you coming with a facade of holiness. It's the other way around. Judaism understands this. That's why it's so important to be involved in the things and the affairs of the world. Be involved in things of the world. Don't be like the world, but be involved in the things of the world. Be knowledgeable. Open your horizon a little bit, folks. 9 out of 10, a lot of the stuff that we technically believe comes from an evangelical point of view, by the way. I'm talking in this assembly specifically. Because our understanding is, in the evangelical world, it is about piety and holiness and all these different things. And we really end up doing a disservice to what we're really supposed to do. Again, how many of you here today would have actually taken the job of Joseph and go to Pharaoh and go to Egypt and look like an Egyptian. You know, most of the things that they did was practice, they were heathen. The whole shaving and all that, everything they do had some level of connection with their gods. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? Yet, Hashem says, you're going into those courts and you're going to rule there and you're going to look like them. You know, Joseph wore makeup. He was Egyptian. All Egyptians wore makeup. Probably look exactly like the figures that you see. Exactly like that. Joseph shaved his face completely, his body completely. It says it when they took him to the court, he got shaved completely. We'll see that. He looked like a goyim. He was ruling as a goyim, but through that came the redemption. See? Because he had in mind other ideas, as he was disguised as an Egyptian. And that's the same thing that we see in here with Judah and Tamar. That's why this is inserted in the middle, because while Joseph is being prepared to do this disguise, Judah and Tamar are also doing the same thing. One is preparing the Messiah, the other one is gathering the tribes. Because what did Joseph do at the end? He gathered the tribes. See? And this become good, very good. The opposite of that, the opposite completely of that we see in the Tanakh, and there's more examples, but we are pressing for time. The opposite would be Mordecai. Now I'm going to give you an example of what a pious person is like. Mordecai would not bow down before Haman whatsoever. He refused, it says. And what did that do? Brought a lot of trouble to the Jewish people. It brought persecution. What did Jacob do? Jacob bowed down 7 times before Esau. And what did that do? It brought peace. Wisdom, guys, wisdom. Because Mordecai completely put thank God that in here now Esther has to go what? Undercover. See how things work? Even though we make poor choices, God uses those still. Now there's an element of deceitfulness here because now Esther has to go undercover and pretend to be, a Goya. You see what I mean? Now here we have the same element. But I just want you to do the comparison, the contrast. Mordecai would not bow down because, what is the interpretation for many people? Oh, because you should not bow down before anyone. When in reality, the Bible is saying you should not bow down before a deity. You can bow down before humans because in an ancient world, and even today, that's a form of what? A respect. Respect. This is what I'm saying. But Mordecai wouldn't even do that. What was Haman requiring from Mordecai, by the way? Was Haman required to be worshipped? Haman wasn't required to be worshipped. It was submission to the rule of Haman because he ruled the kingdom. Remember, he was given that authority and that power. That's it. But Haman being so stubborn, so righteous, I'm pious, look what it did. Nothing good came out of it. And not immediately at the moment. The Jewish people receive a lot of persecution because of it. And many died, by the way. So hope that this is a blessing to you guys. And may Hashem bless you and keep you. And let's go ahead and take our